So I just learned about a Sedevacantists group called Home Aloners, Home Alone Sedevacantists, and it just made so much sense. It just made so much sense, and I'm going to get to why this makes sense to me. Before I get to all that, I wanted to tell you a short story that I heard from an American Baptist preacher named Tony Campola. If you're not familiar with the Baptists, they were started in 1606 in Amsterdam by a man named John Smith. Who broke away from the Mennonite church, who was started in 1525 by a man named Simon Menno, hence Mennonites. He was a former Catholic priest who broke away from the Anabaptists, and the Anabaptists were started in 1520. They broke away from Luther's church because they didn't believe in infant baptism. They were the first church that didn't believe in infant baptism. And Luther broke away from the Catholic Church in 1517, and his followers are called Lutherans. So getting back to the late pastor Tony Campola, he was an American Baptist. Now the Southern Baptist, which is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, broke away from the American Baptist in 1850 or 1855 because they wanted to get back to the tradition of the church. They wanted to stick to tradition, and they thought the American Baptists were too modern because the American Baptists wanted to abolish slavery. The Southern Baptists believed slavery was biblical. So just a brief history. I could go on. I could tell you how hundreds of these denominations broke away from each other, all looking to get back and all claiming tradition. But getting to the story, Tony Campola was an Italian guy from New York. So I'm going to tell you the story the way he said it. He was a typical Italian from New York or New Jersey. So I'm going to tell you just the way he said it. So he came home from church one Sunday afternoon, and he had a bottle of red wine, to go with his spaghetti and meatballs. And his Southern Baptist neighbor comes running across the lawn and says, "Pastor, don't you know that drinking alcohol is a sin?" And he looks at it and goes, "What are you talking about? Jesus' first miracle, he turned water into wine." And his neighbor looked at him and said, "Yeah, I wish he never did that." So the story is so funny because if you ever met a legalist, or if you ever became a legalist at one point in your life, you realize that legalists will elevate their personal conviction above the teachings of Jesus, or in the case of Catholics, above the teachings of the church. And that's what you had with these Sedevacantists. Basically, they all think they know better than the church. So the Home Aloners, the Home Alone Sedevacantists, believe there is not any valid clergy. They all died off. Therefore, it would be a sin for them to go to a Catholic Mass. So instead, they stay home alone on Sunday, pray their rosaries, pray ancient prayers, and that's how they have church, home alone. Hence, Home Alone Sedevacantists. Now, to me, it's the logical conclusion of all Sedevacantists. So you have the most famous one right now, excommunicated Carlo Maria Vigano. He joined this Sedevacantist cult called the Resistance. And they believe there are some valid priests, but they were ordained before 1958, or before Vatican II, which I think took place in 1965. But there's only a few, a remnant. And this is why Carlo Maria Vigano was reordained, and I believe rebaptized. I don't know about rebaptized because he was baptized before Vatican II, so I guess he was just reordained. by twice excommunicated Bishop Richard Williamson. And this is why Carlo Maria Vigano's cult, Resistance, rebaptizes Catholics, which is a mortal sin. If you didn't know this, I didn't know this when I was a Protestant. I got rebaptized and I had to confess the sin when I came back to the Catholic Church. But that's a sin because you're saying the Holy Spirit didn't do its work, his work. So this is why Carlo Maria Vigano is rebaptizing Catholic, ordaining priests, because they don't think anything after Vatican II is valid. Now, they're different than the they broke away from so the Resistance broke away from the SSPX in 2012 because they believed that they were betraying their founder, excommunicated Marcel Lefebvre, who said that they shouldn't compromise with Rome, with the church, with the Vatican, until the church returns to the faith. And since they didn't believe the church, us, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, returned to the faith, that SSPX was compromising. So they broke away, and then Richard Williamson, when he got excommunicated the second time, he was excommunicated by Pope St. John Paul II. The first time, Pope Benedict lifted his excommunication, but then he had to excommunicate him again. So twice excommunicated Richard Williamson joined this resistance cult. So that's where they started. They're different. That was in 2012. The SSP5 broke away from the SSPX a lot earlier. I got some notes there. A lot of dates to remember. I remember stories, but dates sometimes I got to think about. So the SSP5 broke away in 1983. And the reason they broke away, they agree with Vigano's cult, and they both, the Vigano's cult, the Resistance, and the SSP5, both disagree with the SSPX that Vatican II is legitimate. SSPX believe most of Vatican II, but they reject some parts. Cafeteria Catholics pick and choose what they believe. But they all believe the ordinary mass that the church has approved, what many call the Novus Ordo, is what's the word? Intrinsically evil. So they all believe that. But the SSPX, although they have no canonical status and their mass is considered illicit by the Vatican still to this day, and according to canon law, illicit masses are sacrilege. But even though they say they're in communion with Rome because they believe the Pope is the Pope. So that's why they're not Sedevacantists. They're just have no canonical status. They're just schismatic. But they do believe the Pope is the Pope. But they believe they don't have to obey the Pope. They know better. They obey Lefebvre, this excommunicated guy. Whatever he says, he's basically their God or their Pope. He's the guy they look to. They always reference him. Well, he said this. Kind of like idol worship, maybe. I don't know. They just put this guy up on a pedestal like a saint. But before that, when I was studying this, and if you want me to go deeper, I'll do a deeper video on the weekend. My early morning videos before I take off to work. I can't go on for that long, like today. But I found dozens. There might be hundreds of these groups. You can go far back as Vatican I. They call themselves the Old Catholics. They rejected Vatican I. They rejected the Mass being in Latin because the first 4 centuries, the Mass was said in the vernacular. They're called the Old Catholics. They believe they're holding on tradition. And just like all Protestant groups and like the SSPX, they broke off. There's like 20 different old Protestant groups now. That was like in the 1800s. But in 1953, another Sedevacantist group broke off called the Slaves of the Immaculate Heart. That was started by excommunicated Father Leonard Feeney. Leonard Feeney was excommunicated because he taught that if you weren't Catholic, you couldn't be saved. What he did, he took the teaching, there's no salvation outside the church, out of context. And the Pope told them twice, you're taking this out of context. That's never been the meaning of the church. He explained traditionally what that meant. And Feeney rejected it. Of course, he knew better than the Pope, like all Sedevacantists believe, and he was excommunicated. So the one thing I noticed about all these groups, including Martin Luther, the Lutherans, they all were started by an excommunicated clergy, either a priest or a bishop. And they all, including Martin Luther, Marcel Lefebvre, Carlo Vigano, they all called the current Pope that excommunicated them the Antichrist. Martin Luther called Pope Leo X the Antichrist. Marcel Lefebvre called Pope St. John Paul II an Antichrist. Carlo Maria Vigano called Pope Francis an Antichrist. So this is what they all have in common. Another thing they all have in common is they all think they know better than the church. They all claim to be the remnant, just like in the Protestant cults, like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness, we're the remnant. You're like, well, if what you're saying is so true, why are you so small? Because we're the remnant. We're the only ones that know the truth. This is what cults say. They're the only ones that are holding on to the tradition of the church. And all these remnant Catholics claim the same thing. And they all split off just like the Protestants, just like Luther, Anabaptists, and 40,000 more Protestants. You have tons, maybe hundreds of these Sedevacantist groups. But the one thing, so I just, so much to remember, but I wanted to give you like the points so you can avoid these schismatic groups. They all claim to be the remnant. They all claim to be traditionalists. They're all started by an excommunicated clergy. I thought I wrote it. I thought I wrote it down, but I didn't. But I mean, some of them have come to the logical conclusion that this belief, this false belief, brings them to. They're home aloners, like no clergy is good. Others saved the church and elected their own popes. I found like at least 4 of them that have a pope. There was a Pope Michael that was elected, I think, I don't know, in like the 1990s, and he was pope of this little church in Kansas. He had like 100 members. They elected him pope in the 90s, and he died in like 2022. Then you have the most famous pope, Pope Peter III of the Palmarian Church. He succeeded Pope Peter III in the Palmarian Church, succeeded Pope Peter II. So, I mean, it's, to me, when I came back to the Catholic Church and I started hearing all this schismatic stuff on YouTube, I was like, dude, Satan is so deceitful. He's got these Catholics spewing the same garbage that the Protestants spew. It's like Martin Luther spewed, but they're Catholics, so people listen to them. But they're basically saying, we know better than the Pope. We know better than the hierarchy. We know better than the church. Follow us, or follow Marcel Lefebvre, or follow Carlo Vigano, or follow Pope Peter III, or follow Pope Michael. I was just like so blown away. And they all claim tradition. But the reason I came back to the Catholic Church, because I was looking for a tradition. As a Protestant of 30 years, I always wanted to get back to that original church. And I found it. And the saints, like St. Padre Pio, they are the complete opposite of these traditionalists on YouTube, complete opposite of these Sedevacantists. When Pope Padre Pio was unjustly disciplined and told he couldn't celebrate Mass publicly, he didn't start a GoFundMe like Sedevacantist Father James Altman and make $1 million in a month. He didn't get people riled up to violate Canon Law 1397 or 93, where it says, if you stir up hostilities towards the clergy and the Pope, you need to be punished. No, the people were stirred up. They were mad. They loved St. Padre Pio. And he disciplined them and said, you don't speak ill of the Pope. You obey the Pope and you go home. And he said this, the will of my superiors is the will of God, because saints know obedience is the most important thing for Christians. The Bible says to obey is better than sacrifice. So I'm just going to show you in the scriptures where this comes from, how the evil one takes pride. And the Bible tells us pride comes before destruction, and he stirs up pride in the hearts of Christians. He stirs up to rebel against the Catholic Church and say, we're the true Christians, we're the true Catholics. And you can see in my comments all the time, I have many classical Protestants that claim that they're Catholic. But unlike our Sedevacantists brothers, they don't say we're not Catholic. They just say they're part of the universal church, that it's an invisible church. They're Catholic and we're Catholic. That's what classic Protestantism believes. Martin Luther didn't think he was starting a new church. He thought he was getting back to the tradition of the original church. But the Sedevacantists are worse, in my opinion, because they say they're the only true Catholics. We're not even Catholic. Carlo Maria Vigano's cult don't even think you're Catholic if you're not part of his little group. This is what amazes me. Everybody, Lie-Site News is always promoting him like he's some kind of saint. And he's basically saying, you're not Catholic. But I'm going to show you in the scriptures where this evil derives from. First, let me show you what I'm talking about when I say obey is better than sacrifice. 1 Samuel 15, 22, 23. And Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. And here's the key verse right here. Listen up. 1 Samuel 15, 23. For rebellion is the sin of divination, and stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry. Rebellion is divination. Some translations say witchcraft. Rebellion is demonic. Once you rebel against God, you open yourself up to demons. Jesus said in Matthew 16, 18, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. He gave us a church. He gave us Peter to represent himself. So when you're disobeying Peter, you're disobeying Christ. St. Pius X said, you cannot be holy if you dissent from the Pope. Look at St. Padre Pio, look at the saints. It's the opposite. Obedience was the key. And why is that? Isaiah tells us in Isaiah 14, 12 to 15, talking about Satan here. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far north. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far north. I will descend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself the most high. But you are brought down the Sheol to the depths of the pit. I will. That pride, he wanted to be greater than God. He wanted to be the boss. And you see rebellion, the first sin, Adam and Eve, listened to this liar and rebelled against God. Just as a side note, and I've made videos about this, Carlo Maria Vigano is worth $30 million, just so you know. And I have a lot of people, they're afraid of these cults. These cults are dangerous, so they don't want me to put out their names. But I get a lot of emails that Carlo Maria Vigano pays a lot of these, donates a lot of money to these YouTube sites who don't come out and say they're Sedevacantists, but they prop up these Sedevacantists like Carlo Maria Vigano, Father James Altman. So it's something to think about, and if I get permission, I'll give some more information about this and I'll make some more videos. But just know, Jesus is not a liar. Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. So if you hear someone on YouTube, and I don't know if Altman still claims to be a Sedevacantist, because he had a different view. He made up a new view of Sedevacantists. He said Pope Francis wasn't Pope because he committed heresy, even though tradition tells us only a Pope could declare that another Pope committed heresy. So, and what these guys do, just like the Protestant legalists that break away from each other, they'll take Bible verses out of context. These guys will take canon law out of context, councils, popes, and they'll even have some theologians promoting what they believe. But the bottom line is, I'm not a theologian, but I'm Catholic. And I know this, it's very simple. Canon law 1404 says, the Holy See is judged by no one. And tradition tells us that means none of us, only a pope, can judge another pope. So it's very simple. These guys are creating chaos and crises, you know, to prop up their views on YouTube and then promote all these Sedevacantists who probably really believe what they believe. They're causing so much anxiety and stress amongst Catholics. And St. Padre Pio says, pray, hope, and don't worry. Because us true Catholics, we do. We pray, we hope, we don't worry. I never stress. I know God was going to protect the church. And I know the Pope is the Pope. And they're not, you know? And if I disagree with the Pope, like Pope Pius X says in his letter to the priests, to these modernists, Pope Pius, talking to the true modernists, or these rad trads today, according to Pope Pius X, if you read his letter to love the Pope, he says it's not the job of the Pope to explain it more clear so you can understand it, that he's being too ambiguous. It's your job to obey the Pope. If you're Catholic, this is a hard truth. Stop acting like our Protestant brothers. Stop protesting the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And we're not alone. God gave us a church with a family and a hierarchy, a pope, his bishops, the magisterium. We're not alone. God bless and stay Catholic.